It all began on what looked like an ordinary morning in San Francisco, though ordinary is never the right word once a day reveals a fault line running quietly beneath its surface. The sun had only just started to spill over the ridges, pouring a soft gold down into the neighborhoods and throwing the bay into a slow, glittering shimmer. Carol moved through the kitchen with practiced calm, flipping pancakes while the warm smell of butter and vanilla hovered in the air like a small, comforting promise. Outside, the faint rhythm of cable cars mixed with the distant clatter of morning traffic, a soundscape she'd grown used to, the city's steady heartbeat that had once felt like the measure of her life. Samuel moved through their Pacific Heights apartment with the same smooth, confident ease he always had. He walked with the casual assurance that had once made her chest flutter, precise and composed, a man who kept his edges neat. He zipped his suitcase with that effortless charm and tilted his head in a smile that always suggested he was untouchable. "I've got a 3-day business trip," he told her as if he were announcing nothing more consequential than a quick errand. "Just some important meetings. I'll be back before you know it." Carol's hand paused mid-flip, the pancake balanced on the spatula. There was something in the way he said it, so matter-of-fact, so untroubled, that made the room tilt a degree she felt in her stomach. She forced a small smile and let her voice come out soft and even. "All right, love. Take care and call me when you get there." He nodded, kissed her quickly, a light, hurried press of lips that felt colder than it should have, and left. The door clicked behind him and the apartment contracted inward, the sudden quiet pushing against her ears. Carol breathed out slowly. The feeling that settled into her chest wasn't just tiredness. It was the recognition of a widening distance, subtle at first and then, like a crack in plaster, impossible to ignore. "I need a break," she thought, the need sharp and urgent and wrapped in a hush. Her mind went to the Mission District apartment they owned, a small, quiet refuge tucked away from the city's noise, a place they hardly used but always meant to. It felt suddenly perfect, a few days alone where she could breathe without the pretense of their shared life hovering over her. Within an hour, she had a bag packed. She left the apartment behind, the hum of the kitchen, the staged warmth of a home that suddenly seemed like someone else's set. The drive south felt cleansing. The highway stretched ahead like a ribbon of possibility. Morning fog drifted off the bay and curled around the Golden Gate like a hesitant ghost. Soft music filled the car, acoustic melodies and gentle jazz that matched the looseness of her thoughts, letting her imagine, for a few hours, a world that belonged entirely to her, a place where she was not betrayed, where nothing had been stolen from the center of her life. But when she pulled up to the Mission District apartment and parked in front, something cold went through her chest. Samuel's car sat where she half hoped, half feared it might. For a blink, she allowed herself a hopeful, ridiculous thought. Maybe he'd come to surprise me. She smoothed her face, forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and climbed the steps with a measured, mechanical steadiness. Each stair felt heavier than the last. Her hand trembled as she fitted the key into the lock, turning it with the hopeful stealth of someone anticipating happiness. She opened the door and then saw them. Laughter poured from the living room, bright, careless, Kate's hand resting against Samuel's arm in a way that made something inside Carol go very still. The scene was ordinary, horrifying in its ordinariness. The intimacy, the tilt of their heads together, the way he looked at Kate with that same unguarded ease he'd once reserved for her. The betrayal was a clean, tangible thing, sudden as a blade. Carol stood in the doorway, rooted. Her knuckles whitened around the handle. There was no dramatic sob, no cinematic collapse, only the heavy, relentless thud of her own heart, a sound that seemed louder than everything else in the room. She stepped back without a sound, closed the door carefully so they would not notice, and walked to her car. Her mind churned, a storm of images and hot, precise focus, but her movements were steady. Not today. Not like this. This wasn't a burst of grief or a flare of blind rage. It was colder and more exact, a sharpened resolve settling into place like a tool she could use. He's going to pay for this, she thought, not in vengeance for its own sake, but in order. To take back what had been taken, to rebalance what had been unmoored. When she drove back up to Pacific Heights, the fog had burned off completely, leaving the hills clear and the bay glinting in the late morning light. Carol stood on the porch of the house she'd shared with Samuel for so many years. Once a sanctuary, now a stage set for a reckoning, and felt, for the first time in a long time, the thrill of control. She pulled out her phone and dialed. "Andrew," she said when he answered. Her voice was steady, shaped into something that would not be mistaken for anything but intent. "I need you to come over. It's urgent." Andrew, her attorney and longtime confidant, arrived within the hour, worry etched into his features as he stepped inside and took in Carol's posture, poised, unblinking, dangerous in the way calm people sometimes are. He sat down across from her and watched her like someone waiting to see which of two sides would show up. "What's going on, Carol?" "You sound different," he said carefully. She met his gaze and let none of the morning's small betrayals show. "Samuel cheated on me," she said plainly. "I want everything transferred to my name. This house, our joint properties, all of it. And I want it done fast." Andrew hesitated only a heartbeat, long enough to measure the steel behind her words. Then he closed his eyes briefly, the way someone does when they are choosing how to proceed. "All right," he said finally, and there was no patronizing softness in it. "I'll handle it." As they began to lay out the first steps, reviewing deeds, checking titles, gathering whatever documentation might matter, Carol found her mind sliding into a kind of work she had once known, the slow, careful unpicking of something tangled beyond use. She wasn't just reclaiming property. She was reclaiming the shape of her life. The morning that had started like any other had fractured along an ugly seam, and she intended to make every piece of that fracture clear and accounted for. Within days, Carol had taken complete control of the Pacific Heights house. Every lock was changed, every key replaced, every possible entry point now under her command. Andrew moved quickly to finalize the property titles, leaving nothing to chance. Meanwhile, Samuel wandered through his days wrapped in the complacency of his lies, completely unaware that the ground beneath him had already shifted. A few days later, Carol walked into Pacific Bay Bank with calm, measured steps, every motion composed, almost serene. She approached the teller with a light, practiced smile. "I'd like to transfer all funds from our joint account into a new personal account," she said casually. "Samuel and I are reorganizing our finances." The bank manager nodded without question, accustomed to her confidence. Within minutes, a large sum of money had been transferred securely into her name alone. Carol held the receipt in her hand, letting the power of the moment wash over her, the dizzying, heady thrill of authority finally tangible. She stepped outside into the crisp bay air, sunlight stretching over the city, feeling the expanse of freedom in the salt-tinged breeze. "He still has no idea," she whispered to herself, a small, satisfied smile tugging at the corners of her lips. And she was right. A few days later, Samuel returned. He pulled his car into the driveway of the Pacific Heights house, the afternoon sun glinting off the windshield, catching in his eyes like a silent challenge. 3 days with Kate had left him feeling invincible, reckless, refreshed. He strode confidently to the front door, key in hand, expecting the smooth familiarity of home. It didn't fit. Confusion flickered across his face. He twisted and forced the key, muttering, "What the hell?" under his breath. Nothing worked. Panic began to simmer, a slow burn beneath his skin. He pulled out his phone and called Carol. She answered on the third ring, her voice calm, almost pleasant, as if nothing were wrong in the world. "Hi, Samuel." "Carol, what's going on?" "My key doesn't work." "Did you change the locks?" She let a deliberate pause stretch between them, letting the weight of it settle over him. "Oh, right. I forgot to tell you. I did change them." His voice cracked, disbelief rising into panic. "You forgot to tell me? What do you mean you changed the locks?" "I'm standing in front of our house and I can't get in." Carol's tone remained unwavering, precise. "It's simple, Samuel. Some things needed to change. Oh, and by the way, this house is in my name now. I thought you should know." The line went silent. Samuel blinked, irritation giving way to a rising, cold realization. Something had shifted far beyond anything he had imagined. "No, Samuel," Carol said evenly, each word deliberate, cutting through the fog of his panic. "This isn't a joke. You really should start paying more attention to what's happening around you, especially when you decide to disappear for a few days." She let the silence linger, heavy and oppressive. Then her voice softened just enough to be disarming, deceptively tender. "But don't worry, we'll talk again soon, when you're ready to have a real conversation." And then she hung up. Samuel was left standing alone on the porch, the city sprawling and indifferent around him, powerless in a way he hadn't felt in years. He stood there, gripping his phone, staring at the house that had once been his kingdom. The afternoon sunlight slanted across the facade, illuminating the manicured gardens and wide bay windows like silent, accusing eyes. He tried the lock one last time, twisting it forcefully, but deep down he already knew. It wasn't the door keeping him out. That night, sleep eluded him entirely. The hotel room downtown felt like a prison cell, each tick of the clock loud and relentless, reminding him of how quickly his world was unraveling. He paced the floor, running his hands through his hair, desperately trying to summon a plan, some explanation. By morning, he convinced himself it had to be a misunderstanding. "She's just trying to get a reaction out of me," he muttered, gripping the steering wheel as the city blurred past in foggy morning light. The unease in his chest, cold and persistent, would not dissipate. He had no idea the storm was only just beginning. Arriving at the Morgan Group headquarters, he felt the tension immediately. Security guards glanced at him with subtle curiosity, whispering as he passed, a whisper of the unease he couldn't yet name. He tried to brush it off, striding toward his office to reclaim the effortless authority he had always wielded. But then his secretary intercepted him, her face pale, hesitant. "Mr. Samuel," she said carefully, voice almost trembling, "the legal department asked me to give you this immediately." She handed him a sealed envelope embossed with the Morgan Group logo. "They said you need to read it before doing anything else." A tight knot formed in his stomach. He retreated into his office, closed the door, and tore the envelope open. The documents inside hit him like a hammer to the chest. Carol hadn't just changed the locks on the Pacific Heights house or emptied their joint account. She had become the majority shareholder of the Morgan Group. "What? How is this even possible?" he whispered, hoarse, flipping through page after page of signatures, legal approvals, and corporate transfers. It was all there in black and white, undeniable. His hands shook as he called her. "Carol, what did you do? How did you get control of the company? This isn't possible." His voice wavered between fury and fear. Her reply was calm, measured, cutting through his panic like glass. "You gave it to me, Samuel. You signed everything without reading. Remember? While you were busy chasing your distractions, I was securing our future. Now the control is mine." He staggered back, nearly dropping the phone. The walls of his office seemed to close in, sunlight harsh and accusing across the room. "You can't do this," he managed, voice hoarse. "This is betrayal." Carol let out a short, humorless laugh. "Betrayal? You use that word as if you know what it means. But don't worry, you'll understand soon enough." And then the line went dead. The weeks that followed marked a complete transformation in Carol's life. She moved through her new office with the same calm precision she had exercised in every strategic move against Samuel, but now it was different. This was no longer about reclaiming what had been taken. It was about building something wholly hers. The Morgan Group, once dominated by Samuel's arrogance and careless oversight, was now under her direction. She reviewed contracts, attended high-level meetings, and began restructuring the company. Not with vengeance, but with vision. Every decision she made carried weight. Every directive was deliberate. Employees who had once whispered about Samuel now watched Carol with cautious respect. She cultivated loyalty not through fear or charm, but through competence and transparency. The company responded to her energy. Profits stabilized, innovation flourished, and morale surged. Outside the boardrooms, Carol's personal life flourished in ways Samuel had never imagined. She reconnected with friends who had supported her quietly, family who reminded her of her worth, and mentors who encouraged her to think bigger, dream farther. Her mother, always a steady presence, often dined with her in the evenings, their conversations ranging from business strategies to lessons about life and integrity. "You're unstoppable, Carol," her mother said one evening, her hand resting over Carol's. "You've taken every challenge, every betrayal, and turned it into power. You've grown into someone no one can manipulate or underestimate." Carol smiled, a warmth in her eyes that was entirely unguarded. "It wasn't just about power," she said softly. "It was about finally valuing myself enough to take control of my life. I had to stop letting people define what I could or couldn't have." Meanwhile, Samuel's world was unraveling faster than he could comprehend. In Sausalito, the apartment he now called home was small, sparse, and suffocating. Carmen's departure had left him hollow, the realization of his complete dependency and recklessness sinking in like ice. Every attempt to call Carol, every pleading message to Carmen, met only silence. Bank statements revealed overdrafts. Credit limits had vanished. Investments Samuel had assumed would cushion him were now inaccessible, legally blocked by Carol's meticulous maneuvering. Every attempt to reclaim control of even the smallest asset was met with a wall of legal barriers he could no longer navigate. And then came the public humiliation he hadn't anticipated. Carol, with the same calculated precision she had used to seize their personal and corporate assets, arranged for an internal review at the Morgan Group that revealed Samuel's mismanagement and reckless spending to the board of directors. Emails, missed deadlines, and financial oversights, all documented, all undeniable. The same company he had once dominated now saw him as a liability. Samuel was escorted from the headquarters under polite but firm orders. Board members, once sycophantic in his presence, now avoided him entirely. His phone calls went unanswered. Rumors began to circulate in the city. The man who had seemed untouchable was now a cautionary tale whispered in high-rise offices and upscale cafes. At home, alone in his Sausalito apartment, Samuel stared at the city lights glittering across the bay, realizing that the life he had built on lies had disintegrated completely. For the first time in years, he felt powerless, stripped not only of money and influence, but of respect and the belief that he could ever regain it. And all the while, Carol thrived. She expanded the Morgan Group's reach, opened new divisions, and cemented herself as a leader whose intelligence, resilience, and strategic vision were unmatched. Invitations to industry events, panels, and conferences came regularly, each one a reminder of the respect she now commanded. She walked through the city with her head high, the glow of dusk or dawn reflecting off the bay mirrored by the quiet confidence she carried in her chest. Evenings were her sanctuary. She often sat by the window of her office, overlooking the sparkling water, savoring the calm that came from having finally reclaimed her life. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the deceit, they were all behind her, tools that had sharpened her rather than broken her. Trust, she knew, would always remain fragile. But she had learned that when it is rebuilt on a foundation of self-worth and vigilance, it can endure. And Carol had become the architect of that foundation, not just for herself, but for the company she now led and the life she had meticulously reconstructed. Samuel, once a man who had believed himself untouchable, was now a distant echo, a reminder of everything she had survived and everything she had reclaimed. He would watch from the shadows, powerless, while she stood in the light, whole, free, and unstoppable. Carol sipped her coffee one evening, the fading sun casting a golden glow across the office. The city was alive below her, full of possibility. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel not just victory, but peace. She had been betrayed, deceived, and abandoned, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and in full control of her destiny. And she would never let anyone take that from her again. You just heard this one from Stories by Sue. If it resonated, don't forget to like and subscribe. What are your thoughts? Share them in the comments. I'd love to hear. Thanks for watching.